The US basketball player Brittney Griner has been released from prison in Russia. Ms. Griner was exchanged for the notorious Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout, who has been held in an American prison for 12 years. Well, President Biden has welcomed the release.
After months of being unjustly detained in Russia, held under intolerable circumstances, Brittney will soon be back in the arms of her loved ones, and she should have been there all along. This is a day we've worked toward for a long time. We never stopped pushing for her release. It took painstaking and intense negotiations, and I want to thank all the hard-working public servants across my administration who worked tirelessly to secure her release.
Well, we know Brittney Griner is now on a plane back to the US from the United Arab Emirates. The swap was made at Abu Dhabi Airport. It's been revealed that a joint Saudi-UAE team played a leading role in the mediating the prisoner exchange. Russia's foreign ministry also confirmed the swap. They said the Russian citizen has been returned to his homeland. Well, this was the response from Ms. Griner's wife.
As we celebrate BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones. So thank you, everybody, for your support. And today is just a happy day for me and my family. So I'm going to smile right now.
Well, Brittney Griner is one of the best-known sportswomen in America. She plays in the Women's National Basketball Association. That's America's top women's basketball league. She won gold at the Olympics in 2016 and in 2020 for the US basketball team. This, though, relates to her time playing for the Russian Premier League during the WNBA off-season. Brittney Griner's ordeal began on February 17th when she was returning to Russia to finish her overseas season. Customs officials detained her at an airport near Moscow after they found cannabis oil in her luggage. Ms. Griner admitted to possessing the oil, but she said she had no criminal intent and that she'd inadvertently packed them in haste. Her lawyers later said she was prescribed cannabis to treat pain. In May, the US State Department said Ms. Griner was wrongfully detained. In August, she was convicted in Moscow for drug possession and was then sentenced to 9 years in jail. She then lost her appeal in October. Well, last month, Ms. Griner was moved to a penal colony in Mordovia. That's a remote area some 500 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Russian penal colonies are known for their harsh conditions. Prisoners are placed in barracks, not cells, and are forced to perform daily work. Well, many players and figures in US basketball have welcomed Brittney Griner's release. Among them was the twice WNBA champion Breanna Stewart, who tweeted, "BG is free, 294 days, and she's coming home." Well, the WNBA's commissioner has also spoken out about her release.
It's been a long ordeal, horrible ordeal, and really look forward to her return and hearing her voice. And I always call her this gentle giant. Really look forward to reuniting myself with her because she had written me a letter a couple of months ago. And, since then, obviously, the appeal occurred and wasn't successful.
Well, Brittney Griner was exchanged for Viktor Bout, who was imprisoned in the US. Mr. Bout's mother thanked President Putin for his release. A notorious figure, he sold arms to warlords and rogue governments during the 1990s, becoming one of the world's most wanted men. He was dubbed the Merchant of Death and sold guns to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Well, this all ended with his arrest in Bangkok in 2008 in an operation carried out by the US. He was extradited 2 years later to the United States and sentenced to 25 years in jail on conspiracy to kill US citizens and officials, and delivery of anti-aircraft missiles, and also of providing aid to a terrorist organisation. Well, now, when negotiations began to secure Ms. Griner's release during the summer, the US tried to include Paul Whelan, a former US Marine who was jailed in 2018 on suspicion of spying in Russia in the exchange. Well, Mr. Whelan is currently serving 16 years in Russian jail on charges of espionage, which he denies. Speaking to CNN over the phone following Ms. Griner's release, he said, "I'm greatly disappointed that more has not been done to secure my release, especially as the 4-year anniversary of my arrest is coming up. I was arrested for a crime that never occurred." Well, let's hear now from the US Secretary of State.
Unfortunately, Russia has continued to see Paul's case through the lens of sham espionage charges, and they are treating him differently than they treated Brittney Griner. We've made every possible offer available to us thus far to secure Paul's release, but in this moment, there was no way to bring him home along with Brittney.
Well, our State Department correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher is in Washington. And Barbara, the end of a long ordeal for Brittney Griner.
Yes, around 10 months now. She was arrested in February, went through a trial, an appeal, and then last month sent to a Russian penal colony to begin a 9-year sentence. All this time hoping that the Biden administration would be able to secure her release sooner rather than later. And the reports were that when she ended up in the prison colony, she was very down, feeling that perhaps she wouldn't be freed after all. And we had been told by U.S. officials that throughout the past months that the Russians did not seem to be engaging that much. They seemed to be stonewalling somewhat. Although in the last couple of weeks, there was a little bit of cautious optimism on both sides, but the announcement came unexpectedly, and apparently the deals were sorted out in the past 48 hours. And a big part of it is, as you said, that it was Griner or no one. The administration had worked very hard at a 2-for-1 swap, so Paul Whelan plus Brittney Griner for the convicted arms dealer Viktor Bout, but they were told that it would be only Brittney Griner and they needed to take it or leave it, and President Biden decided to take it.
And what more do we know about why Washington decided to trade Mr. Bout with her?
It's a big step. It's a big prize because Viktor Bout was convicted in the United States for arms dealing and other charges. And he had a reputation as a very notorious arms dealer for decades. And the Americans went to a great length to get him. They had this very elaborate sting in order to trap him and then put him on trial. And the Russians had been trying to get him for a long time, but they've said that the Americans refused to put him on the table. Now they did. Part of that was they wanted a 2-for-1 swap, and they figured they needed a big player in order to do that. But there was also the fact that there was so much attention paid to Brittney Griner's case. There was a lot of pressure coming from her supporters. It was very high profile, unusually high profile for these kinds of hostage negotiations or hostage diplomacy. And they wanted to show that they were doing everything they could to get her back. In the end, they had to make that decision whether to make this trade, which of course is for a convicted arms dealer on the one hand, and a woman, a sports star who was arrested for having less than 1 gram of cannabis oil, if it was only her, if they weren't going to get 2 in exchange. And the Secretary of State said they wanted to not lose a chance to at least get 1 American home. But it was, I think, a big decision.
And Barbara, I mean, on some level it shows, doesn't there, that at least in lower levels there is some sort of communication between Russia and the US for this to have happened?
There are communications on this channel, yes, when it comes to prisoner swaps, which both sides really, I think, have kept separate from the major tensions over Russia's war in Ukraine and the fact that the United States is arming Ukraine. So you actually had some results in April already when another American who was detained in Russia was released, Trevor Reed, and that also gave energy to the campaigns to get Brittney Griner released, as well as Paul Whelan. So this kind of thing was happening alongside the war in Ukraine.
Barbara, thank you very much indeed. Barbara Plett-Usher there in Washington. Well, Vladimir Osechkin was a Russian MP who led a Russian Parliament committee investigating Viktor Bout. Well, he's now a dissident in France and has been speaking to my colleague Olga Malchevska about what and why President Putin was pushing for his return.
I was contacted by several MPs linked to the President's administration and the intelligence services who were trying to lobby for our working group to advocate for Viktor Bout and portray him as a political prisoner. But he wasn't, of course. It was obvious that Viktor Bout was closely linked with the Russian intelligence services.
How did you find out that?
We had several people in Parliament who'd been serving in the intelligence before, on the FSB and the GRU, and they told me, be careful, because Viktor Bout's destiny was supervised by the FSB and the GRU. One of them was lobbying me and pressuring me to get involved. However, Considering that this story was linked to the special services, arms dealing and supplying weapons to certain terrorist organizations, our team of course refused to participate in the inquiry. We did not send any requests to the US advocating for Viktor Bout on asking for his release. We asked Ali Bout, his wife, about his condition inside the US prison. And of course, when we see at the same time thousands of complaints from prisoners in Russia being tortured with severe cruelty, being raped and killed according to our investigations, we felt it would be unfair and unreasonable to file any serious complaints to the US prison system. As far as we know, during all this time, Viktor Bout has not been beaten or raped there.
Do you think he was a political prisoner or not?
I think that Viktor Bout was not a political prisoner, as defined by Amnesty International. But at the same time, I can say that for Vladimir Putin personally, for his closest circle, the generals of the Russian intelligence, this person is symbolic. They've been trying to return him to Russia for over 10 years.
Why do you think Russia is interested to swap him now?
Putin and the generals were worried that Viktor Bout might start providing detailed and consistent evidence of what he knew about Russian intelligence, helping terrorist organizations and organizing sabotage abroad. It was a matter of honor for them to take their agent back.